Sean McDowell and J. Warner Wallace have joined forces to answer that very question in their new book, So the Next Generation Will Know. And thanks for joining us, guys.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for having
And
us.
also our studio audience. Isn't this awesome?
Yeah, very cool.
So great to have everybody here.
And this is also the first time the three of us get to do an interview together.
Yeah, and
this
it's
is exciting.
and it's a male-dominated group.
This
here.
is, you know,
does that feel better?
a little different than your normal 100 Huntley screen.
Yeah, this is great. I'm enjoying it. Thanks, guys, for being here.
I just wanted to add the numbers for you, so
Yeah, good.
do what we can.
Okay, so talking about back on track, talking about Gen Z, just give us a sense of the age group that they are right now and who they are.
Well, we're really talking about, I think, kids from 3 to 20-ish in that range. We're talking about millennials and the next generation down are Gen Z. Now, people call them iGen. You've heard a couple other titles that are used for this generation. But if you've got junior hires or high schoolers in your house or grade school, you've got a Gen Z student that probably is facing some of the issues we talk about in the book.
Okay, so why, Sean, did you write the book?
I think a few reasons. One would be Scotty, Shauna, and Shane, which are my kids. I started noticing that there's certain trends shaping the way this generation thinks. And I get asked all the time, how do I pass on my faith to the next generation? And I kind of thought, gosh, if I can do research and figure this out with my own kids, I think other people would be interested in figuring this out as well.
Yeah, when my kids were growing up, I kind of grew up with them in the church, serving in the church as the children's minister, then as a youth pastor. So I got to know this generation, and this is where we kind of came in contact. And so we thought this is a good opportunity to kind of describe our own personal experiences, both the good stuff that we kind of learned from and the train wrecks that we wish we had never done it quite that way. But you learn a lot from mistakes, and you can learn from our mistakes too.
So we're hearing that significant numbers of Gen Z are leaving the church, but they're not leaving God. Explain this. Why is this happening?
Well, there's a number of reasons why kids will disengage the church and some will disengage their faith. And it's important to distinguish between those who used to identify as Christians and those who are genuinely leaving the faith and the church. So you go back a generation or two and it was popular to just say, oh, I'm a Christian. Now people are resisting labels, yet those who define themselves as Christians, I don't know how many really were in the first place. That's where it's hard to decipher some of these statistics. But at its core, I think those who disengage do for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's a relational brokenness. Studies show that the most significant statistical factor in faith being passed on to the next generation is a, quote, warm relationship with the father. And that doesn't mean the mother's not important. It means the father tends to be a little bit more of a wild card. So statistically, relationships are key. Second, there's a truth component. The kids aren't convinced this is really true. And they haven't been taught how to navigate culture from within a Christian framework. So the book is about truth. How do we help kids think Christianly? But also we have to develop very intentional, warm relationships with this generation to live out that truth.
You think about the rise of fake news as well, and how that, they've been told that you don't know if something's true or not. How do I discern that? Is part of this teaching them how to discern what's true? Yeah,
Interestingly, if you poll this generation, you'll find that the level of distrust, you would think with all the access to information we have, this might be the most informed, educated, and it probably is. But the level of distrust is also very high, right? Because if you think about it, the sources we have for information all look equally legitimate. The question then becomes, well, can I trust this authority at all? This is why this idea of relationship and truth is so important, because it comes down to, number one, as parents, we should have a good relationship with our kids, but we may not be considered a source of truth on difficult questions that kids have about their faith. So they can go online and find the truth claim, but there's no relationship with the source of that truth claim. And it turns out the most influence you're going to have as a parent, or as anybody proclaiming a truth, is relationship with the person you're talking to and knowledge about the truth claim. Those two things together are the most persuasive. So as parents, we have the first half. We just may not have the second half. The other sources online have the second half, but they definitely don't have the first half. So when we put those two things together, we see, I think, change in the lives of young people.
Sean, your dad, Josh, hugely influenced me. I'd become a new Christian in the early 80s. I was all excited about eternal life and a purpose and all the rest of it. Then I thought, is this even true?
Yeah.
Read a book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And in some ways, I know you're picking up on your dad's legacy here. But I'm thinking too as well, you talk a lot about, and I know your dad's view of this as well, the importance of a biblical worldview. Because as Cheryl mentioned, we talk about this, is the influence of the internet. They're getting all bombarded with all sorts of information.
That's right. So what's interesting is when my dad first wrote Evidence Demands a Verdict, he didn't even have to include a section on truth. I recently helped him update it, and there's a full section on just truth itself. Because what's happened is not only are people saying Christianity is false, they're saying we can't know truth. There's no such thing as truth. Truth is not important. And what a worldview is it's a way of seeing reality. And our worldview only helps us if it's actually true. So with this generation, I am convinced that most of them actually have much more of a secular worldview without even realizing it, on things like truth and freedom and relationships and God, these big questions that shape how we live. So if we care about this generation, we got to help them have true beliefs rooted in Scripture so they can live out that truth in the freedom that God's kingdom offers us.
And Jim, you also talk about thinking critically as well. This generation hasn't really been challenged to think critically about what they believe.
Yeah, one of the things we talk about for parents who are watching, and this is what I hope is encouraging for both of us, is you don't have to be close to the age of Gen Zs in order to have an impact on Gen Z. And I'm 58, and my kids are all adults. But I can tell you, we still work with a lot of high schoolers as part of what we do, because we are engaging this, we are concerned about this generation. We know that as a family, the Christian family, we have an important job as parents, and all of us are sharing this job as parents. If I can just give you one tip that I think will help parents, it's simply to do this. We've seen it a lot. We have a tendency to say what is true to our kids, to make proclamations about what is true. What we've shifted toward is providing two whys for every one what.
Right, yeah.
So in other words, we would say, okay, what is true about the Bible? What is true about Jesus? What is true about God? What is true about what God requires of us? How we should live? Those are all whats. I think young people want to know, okay, well, two whys for that. Well, why is that true? Can you give me some basis for your argument, some evidence that might support why? Because there's tons of counterclaims, and those claims are supported allegedly by scientific evidence, whatever. I need to know, is this claim you're making from the Christian perspective supported by any evidence? Two is, okay, so you've got a claim, and now you've told me why you think it's true. Why should I care? The second why is what I think animates passion in young people. Is how does this apply to me? Why should I care? So what I've tried to do, even with youth pastors as recently as last week, talking about their curriculum, it's always a lot of what proclamations. We need to shift toward the two whys for every what. And don't wait till the end to do this. Do this with every breath. If you're making the what claim, let's make the two whys right there. So don't wait till the next month to do that, because by the time you get to next month, your kids have already checked out.
I think it's so interesting too. You talk about in the book how parents assume that their kids are on the same page as them. They're going to church with them. They seem kind of Christian. They kind of assume that they are exactly where they are. But you say, sit your kids down and really ask them some questions about where they're at and discern that, like dig into it. What are some of the questions, Sean, they should ask?
Well, just this week I sat down with a group of Gen Zers, great parents, Christian school, and I simply said, can you give me a definition of what it means to be a person who's free? And they gave me a definition that said, freedom is doing whatever you want to do as long as no one constrains you. That's their understanding of freedom. I said, well, if God exists, what does that add to the idea of freedom? And they said, well, do whatever you want to do without restraint, but now there's consequences. Now think about that. Their whole view of freedom is secular, and all God adds is consequences. So I walked them through saying, wait a minute, actually, if God created us according to a design, wouldn't freedom be living out according to God's design for our life? Now, this took a while to unpack, but it was just simply asking them questions and interacting, surface all these assumptions they had adopted from the culture, and then just help them to think more Christianly about it. These are just the kinds of conversations we have to have with this generation.
Wow. Jim, the importance, and you guys really stress this in your book, relationships. And some of the Barna research indicates that Christians don't live any different than non-Christians. The kids are observing that. but the importance of having that relationship to show them what it is to live for Jesus.
Yeah, I think there's a perception we have and for a lot of years the data kind of bolstered this idea that we would ask people in their 20s, are you still involved in the church? Would you identify as a Christian? We find out, well, no, they're not doing that anymore. So we assumed, okay, we're raising them up a certain way, we're sending them to university, and then they're coming back non-believers. Well, the reality of it is, as we poll and dig down into the data, it turns out that most people who will say in their 20s they are no longer Christians will tell us they left this way of thinking between the ages of 10 and 17. So it's not as though they're leaving our homes, well grounded in their faith, and then they lose their faith in college. It's that while they're with us, we may not have the relationship that revealed the level of skepticism they held.
They were already losing their faith.
And this is why the age of skepticism has dropped. And what's dropping it is this glowing rectangle at the end of your hand. This data-rich environment in which we live has dropped the level of skepticism from about 18, when you used to first encounter a skeptic at college, to about 12, when you're first able to surf the internet and encounter skeptics online. We have to, as parents, have deep conversations and relationships that will allow us to see this is happening right before our eyes, not be surprised by it later.
Okay, so as a parent, I'm hearing parents saying, so what do we do? I want my little Ethan and my little Joshua to grow up knowing Jesus and following him. And so I'm asking the questions, I'm having these conversations. What do we do to make sure that at age 7, age 10, that they're not already thinking that? Because that's the age of my kids right now.
Right.
So first off, you pray for your kids.
Yeah.
Second off, do everything you can to build relationships with your kids. That matters. Step into their worlds. We have a whole chapter on 10 practical ways to build relationships with Gen Z. Third is, we're not saying here's a new program you need to do. We're simply saying open up our eyes and look more strategically at opportunities that are there. So my 14-year-old son wanted to see this movie, Bohemian Rhapsody, and I knew there was a little bit of an agenda in this film, and I simply said to him, I said, all right, I'll take you and a friend whose parents okay with this. If when we come back, we just sit down and talk about it. I don't know what you think, and I want to ask you questions. He goes, sure. So we go to the movie, we come back, sat down about half an hour. I didn't lecture him. I just said, what was the view in this about relationships? What was positive? What would a Christian worldview say about this? Did you ever feel the movie was preaching at you? What did you enjoy? And we just talked about it. Now, it's because I'm thinking about passing on my faith that opportunity came to my mind. So we're just telling parents there's opportunities that are there, and not to exhaust our kids, we got to be careful. But if you look for those and utilize them, it's a moment here, it's a talk there, it's an interaction there, that you're shaping your kids' worldview over time, which is really what Deuteronomy 6:4, the Shema, talks about doing anyways.
I love that, Sean, because you're not saying continue to just crowd your child or tell them no, or no, you can't go see Bohemian Rhapsody, but let's have a conversation about this.
That's right.
Because that's kind of what we've done. We've kind of shrouded our kids and protected them, and then they hit the real world, and we're like, oh, I didn't prepare you
But let me
for
just
that.
add something to this too, because passion's contagious.
Yeah.
Organically, your kids have already adopted some of the things before we started sitting down here, we were talking about sports. And all of us could actually add to that conversation in a deep way, because we apparently know enough about these sports and are interested enough about these sports to be able to. So I'm raising up fans of the teams. My kids are the fans of the same teams that I'm a fan of. Why? Because the overflow of my joy in this area apparently has spilled out to my kids, and they've caught it. My question is, are we as parents informed? Are we informed enough? And are we passionate enough that the overflow of our faith is being caught by our kids? Wow. Or are we having to say, well, okay, we're excited about this other thing, but now we're going to stop and talk about God? Really? So it's really about what are we passionate about? And what are the most joyous conversations we have? If they're about your favorite hockey team or your favorite basketball team, probably we need to shift our attention toward the things that really matter.
Yeah, and you say in the book there's some obstacles, even in our own personal lives, that get in the way of our passion and our joy around faith. So what are those obstacles, and how do we overcome them so we can model great faith?
Well, I'll give you one, maybe I can give you another. I think part of it is sin. We have some undisclosed sin. Nobody wants to come before the throne if they feel like they're ashamed of being in front of the throne. So a lot of it to address with young people is, what is that hidden shame or that hidden sin that is keeping you from being passionate? Even as parents, we have to ask that question.
I'd also say misplaced priorities. We place priority on our career and on other things that are important but not the ultimate good. I think busyness is a piece of it. And then third, our own inadequacy. Sometimes we feel like I'm not equipped to have these conversations. I don't have all the answers. And all we're saying is just, if you, in the last chapter of the book, we say, you might read this and feel like, here's so many practical ideas, I'm overwhelmed. And at the end we say, just do one, just do two. Just start, and your kids start to notice this is important, and you can make a difference. So it's not our knowledge or anything we do that makes us adequate. It's God who can speak through us if we're willing and available to just reach out to our kids and take a small step.
Well, guys, thank you so much for being here. There's a lot to think about. And, you know, it's interesting as we were coming out here, we were just talking about the importance now of the global community. I mean, you're traveling all over the world. This is a challenge not only in Canada and America, but around the world. But we have a God that is drawing people by His Spirit. We remember that. So thank you for the great work that you have done, and thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.